Tolerance is the small beginning of freedom from being irritated by pain. We build that tolerance into real patience, which gets stronger and stronger under the pressures of everyday life. Well, thank you all for coming. Dad, Sharon. I've never done this before, tried to moderate. I've tried to moderate for my father many times, but not in a serious matter, and never with you, Sharon. And although I did get my first meditation lesson from you, so this is a great honor to get to be here tonight. I guess I would just start you guys off. Say this book is very interesting. Love Your Enemies. Sharon and Professor Thurman cover a lot of territory about transcendence and compassion and self-transformation, and the only personal kind of note that I found in here, which I like, Sharon, to start with you, which I think touches on the beginning of your relationship. Sharon and my father have been collaborating on this subject for many years. Is that, Sharon, you wrote that, and I wonder if this changed your relationship and started this between you. He wrote that after reading your book, Faith, Dad said to you regarding the things that you shared about your own childhood in that book, you should never be ashamed of the suffering that you'd been through. And you say in this collaboration together that really changed you and made you start to rethink the effects of your suffering had been and how it had transformed you. So I start off with your relationship with Bob in that way.
Well, Professor Thurman and I are old friends. My retreat center, this retreat center I co-founded, is in Barre, Massachusetts, which is about 45 minutes away from Amherst, where you began your, I believe you began your teaching career there.
I did, right.
And we'd always been friends and began teaching together when Bob came to New York City and I started spending more time in New York City. And I wrote a book called Faith, which was really about my own faith journey and talked a lot about the disruptions and the loss and the incredible sorrow of my childhood, as is true for many people. And it was, of course, a little strange for me to have that be so public, and yet I kind of tried to avoid it a lot in writing that book, but my faith journey was really rooted in everything I had gone through. So in the end, I didn't avoid it, and it was kind of uncomfortable for me. And then Bob really turned my thinking around.
Really? I didn't realize.
It was very beautiful.
That's nice. I'm glad. I'm glad.
Thank you.
Well, that's nice. Maybe I didn't suffer as much in my childhood or something. I don't know.
You're in denial.
What? I'm sure that's true. I'm sure that's true. I was a middle son, so I think I was a lost person. But no, still, it doesn't measure up to the difficulties that you experienced because your parents, because you were adopted by so many families and this and that. You had a definitely tougher time, I think, really. And but you know, then I lost my eye after having coasted around. So in a way, our different sufferings helped us,
very much.
Made us encounter the Dharma earlier than we might have otherwise. You might have just been like a suburban housewife in Buffalo. You never know.
Never know.
Republican.
Maybe. What did your teacher say to you when he heard you lost your eye? Something like...
Well, he said that if anybody else asked me about it, I should say I lost one and gained 1,000. And then he said, actually, that's similar. You're right. Because he said, don't be ashamed. Just go ahead and say it. Because he knew that I'm kind of shy, sort of. In my surprisingly, people think I'm very much like a lion or something, but actually I'm very shy. And so he just said, don't be ashamed, but just say that. You lost one and gained 1,000. So I do say that.
So in the book, the two of you, which I think is very nice, you actually open the book saying how to use this book. So it's clear that it's a teaching instrument, this book. You both of you are, this has been a work in progress, the teaching and learning in your own. And you depict 4 types of how you categorize the different enemies. Would you care to sort of enemies as, adversity or, they're not just people, they're not bad guys, right?
Right.
These are 4 different elements of adversity, struggle.
Right. Well, originally I had, as usual, I overdo everything. I'm known as you know very well, I'm known in the household as Mr. Overdue. And, and so I wanted to do a lot with the outer enemies, like solve all the entire geopolitical situations of the entire planet, naturally. Since I think that external enemies, even so-called, war enemies, could solve things if they would avoid hatred and anger. Like one of my lamas beautifully said once that the trigger of the nuclear weapon, plutonium and then the detonator and all of the whole thing about nuclear weapon, but the trigger of the nuclear weapon is hatred in the human mind. And anger and hatred in the human mind. Otherwise, they would never press a button or turn the keys or whatever it is or they wouldn't invent it and make it if they didn't have that. So it's the key component of the nuclear weapon is hatred. So the outer enemy is the first one, of course. That's the obvious one, which is either the political enemy or it's the personal enemy, someone who has the intent to harm you. And some people have objected to us use of the word enemy, saying that, well, if you're being spiritual, you don't have any enemies. And of course, that is the goal, to be a kind of person who doesn't have an enemy in the sense of they don't nurse enmity. But that doesn't mean that there isn't someone else who might still have intent to harm you, and then that person is thinking of you as their enemy, and therefore they are your enemy, classified as your enemy. And this is one of the initial objections that we expected to get. The main objection is, how can you love your enemy? That means they'll come and kill you. You say, please come and shoot me or something to the enemy. That's loving the enemy. That isn't loving the enemy. When Jesus said, love your enemy, he even said in the Beatitudes, in the Matthew, he said, I'm not interested if you love your friends and your family. Everybody does that. I would like to see you loving your enemies. Those are the ones who want to enter with me, into heaven. And Buddha, long before that, said, hatred will never put an end to hatred. Only love puts an end to hatred, and sort of love your enemy sort of routine. And our idea there is that, and I think their idea, and what we've tried to unpack, is that loving your enemy means that you can confront them even forcefully, or you can evade them energetically, run away from them, and yet you're not doing either one while carrying the burden of hating them. And that even if you have to tangle with them, if you don't have hatred for them, you're like a martial art person who can be more balanced, and you can see them from another angle, and you can avoid their problem and even be forceful with them in a way with good judgment that will be effective. So the general principle, without getting into solving all the different problems, the Iranian problem, the China problem, all the problems, Tibetan problem, is just that by loving them means you wish for their happiness. If your enemy is happy, why would they bother to be your enemy?
Right.
And so it's a practical suggestion. We want to argue against those who say that loving your enemy would mean that you'll become a doormat and they'll trample you and walk all over you. On the contrary, it's not good for them to walk all over you, especially if you're a nice person. So you have to oppose that they should do that. You have a right to, but you should do it without hating them. That's the key.
Well, it is December, and it's the birthday of Jesus is coming, so I think it's
that's
very
true.
timely.
That's true.
The other 3 sections of how you describe the enemy are more spiritual and psychological and emotional. Sharon,
Yes.
would you want to start to delve into the inner enemy? What is the inner enemy?
Well, the inner enemy are it's certain states, not from the mere feeling of them, because we feel what we feel, and I think we should never be afraid of or condemn what we feel, but when we're overcome by certain states, like greed, jealousy, hatred, fear, then especially when they drive us into action, then they're very consequential, and they separate us from what is really possible for us, and from a much deeper understanding of what strength is, what happiness is, how we can actually be. And sometimes even happiness is cast as a kind of selfishness. People think, oh, that's just superficial and being conflict avoidant and just endlessly seeking pleasure. But really, it's like this wellspring of well-being out of which we can care and be generous and connect. Otherwise we're so demoralized. We're so brought down by our actions and how unhappy we are. It's actually not serving anybody. So knowing the inner enemies is very important, and at the same time,
the negative emotions.
Yeah, it's
right?
like negative emotions, but not, again, it's not just the feeling of them, because then people carry on, and into another whole place of separation and enmity. But realizing that we can approach all of what we feel in a very different way, with awareness, with balance, with compassion, and let it go if we want to. So it's a tremendous possibility of choice and creativity. So that's really the realm of the inner enemy.
I was thinking, I just had the thought, I don't know if I wrote in the book, while you were talking that...
I'll let you know.
And the intent to harm idea, the inner enemy might present itself to one as helping you. Like tell you, if you blow your top and attack somebody, then you'll really get some benefit. And it tricks you like that. But it does intend to harm the other person. Anger and hatred does. And so, since it therefore is based on the ignorance that you and the other person are different entities, by harming the other person, you are actually harming yourself. So it does fit the definition of intent to harm in an indirect way. Because, and of course, people out of anger and hatred, they'll sometimes kill themselves. They'll commit suicide. They'll harm somebody they love and be very deeply regretted later. So the harm, there is that intent to harm. And it seems the trick is that when your own mind comes to you and says, well, that's too much, I'm going to get rid of that person. They're like horrible, they're not even human, etc. And makes you think, if I get really angry and filled with hatred, I will get rid of them and therefore it will help me. But actually that hurts me. So in fact, it does intend to harm us. Our own emotion tends to harm us when they go out of control like that. And they use us as a tool. So how does that work?
It does work.
I never thought, I don't think I addressed that in
You may not, the sequel.
Oh, good. All right. Oh, good.
But I don't know. I mean, it's also true that those states, those negative or afflictive emotions, don't necessarily have to be directed at people. It could be at suffering itself. We can feel so ashamed and afraid, and at change, at difficulty, at the emotions themselves.
Yeah, we could be putting ourselves down by being angry at ourselves, actually. Right. Okay.
Or a situation, we feel hopeless or helpless in the face of change, and we want to stop change from happening, and that, of course, is an exercise in futility, and so we're just kind of spiraling down.
Okay, that's true.
Well, you make a point strongly, both of you, in different points in the book, that it's to be recognized that this adversity, without it, you wouldn't learn humility and patience, and you wouldn't achieve some sort of better, deeper grace in life, compassion, without suffering. So there seem to be a double edge to what you're implying these experiences are.
That's true. Well, I do have the bad habit of disliking suffering. Myself, I hate to suffer. And I don't as a child, I never liked, well, you've seen me blubbering in sad movies. I hate them. These horrible things, King Lear and Hamlet, and everybody gets wasted at the end. I hate that. I really do. I don't like movies like that. Yeah, people are big on tragedy. That's a great thing, tragedy. And actually, in Buddhist aesthetics, tragedy develops compassion, for you in a way. But in a way, I'm afraid there's a way of seeing tragedy as a kind of scapegoat ritual, where somebody else suffers, and you don't necessarily identify with them and don't necessarily get gripped by it. But anyway, I don't like tragedies. I like comedies. I like happy endings. I can't take it when things don't go well. So I was relieved in Cloud Atlas when it finally worked out.
Oh, God. Many were relieved at the end of Cloud Atlas. But then when you're with your secret enemy, you go into a much more gigantic point. The two of you talk a lot about self-obsession. And you use a lot of interesting terminology, Dad, like self-addiction.
Yes.
And
like narcissism, yes.
You have your own Orwellian kind of speech, which sounds like it.
Really?
Yes, a
you
little
think
bit.
It's Orwellian? That's exciting.
Well, you have your anger addiction, you have your self-addiction, you have self-preoccupation.
Yeah, self-preoccupation. Actually, addiction is something that I like to. There's a famous word Sharon knows, klesha, and in Pali it's kilesa, and it comes from a word klish, which means to twist. And these kind of emotions like envy, hatred, cliché you, they twist you. And so they're usually called afflictions. People translate, I used to translate as affliction, but affliction is just a suffering, actually. Whereas these are emotions that seem to be helping you, but they're actually twisting you out of shape and making you suffer. So they're actually the causes of suffering. So they fit perfectly with the word addiction, in the sense that an addictive substance is something that seems to give you a buzz, and it seems to help you, but it drops you in a worse place than when you were to start with. But the trick of it, the reason it becomes addictive, is it seems to lift you out of your misery or whatever. And so that's why anger comes to you in your own voice and says, if you go beat up so-and-so, you'll be great, then they'll never bother you again. But then actually when you do, then their friends come and beat you up, and then they're miserable, and then you feel badly later, and so forth and so on. So in fact, it leaves you in a worse place. And so all of them are addictions. Then the secret enemy being the self-identity habit, or the underlying the self-addiction, is this idea of yourself as a rigid, unchanging being that always has to defend a sort of separate space and puts you in the predicament. And this is, of course, Buddha's deepest original insight. And let me have, Sharon, please, you tell us your version of that. But that's basically the idea that you're separate from everything else in the universe. So in a way, you are opposed, the universe is opposed to you, and you're opposed to the universe. And that struggle you lose, right? That's the second noble truth.
Well, that's your us versus them.
Yes, that's the root of the us versus them, is that I'm something absolutely separate from everything else, and I have my own space, my own identity, and everything comes at me to take that away. Sickness, old age, death, and enemies. And so I've had to struggle against the universe, and when things are going well and I feel up on top of it, well, the universe seems to be at bay. But then, then the people who are very powerful, then they worry about losing their power, and so really they still are overwhelmed by the universe. Nobody can beat the universe. That was Buddha's insight. Not really a genius thing, but you tell your way, Sharon. No, that's the secret one. But how do you put it?
Well, usually I talk about interconnection and how we actually live in an interconnect. Actually, one of my favorite things I learned from you was the simple word realistic. That we don't necessarily live in harmony with reality, and there's really a twist. It's like the proverbial banging your head against the wall, insisting things not be the way they actually are. And one of the ways they are is that we live in a world of connection, not of isolation. However alone or cut off we might feel, that's because we're not looking deeply enough. And were we to look deeply, and interestingly, not just spiritually, but in terms of environmental consciousness, in terms of economics, even in terms of epidemiology, what we see is that what happens over there doesn't nicely stay over there. It really filters out and affects us over here. And that what we do, it matters because our actions ripple out. And so we can look at anything. We can look at this moment in time, our being here in this room, or on the web or whatever, being together right now. And we're all here because of conversations we had, or interactions, or somebody gave us a book, or, there are a whole series of events that brought us to this moment in time. It's like a confluence of all of that. And that's how every moment in time is. And we can just have this different perspective so that we don't feel, whether in joy or in sorrow, so cut off.
So the isolation, the sense of isolationism itself is an enemy. This is sort of what you have
secret one.
In your secret.
That's what we've classed as the secret. One thing I want to say, what I learned from Sharon about the inner enemy, that's really where the mindfulness meditation, of which she is one of the great masters in the country, and maybe in the world actually, and the idea that you learn to listen to your thoughts, and you learn to see which ones are essential and which are not, and even you begin to realize that none of them are really essential, actually giving yourself the inner freedom to choose between thoughts through cultivating mindfulness. That I really learned from her, although not properly, because I'm the worst meditator, and she's the great one, but I am still working on it.
Is there a competitive meditation?
What?
Can you have competitive meditation?
No, but she's the real meditative teacher.
Do you come out and shake it off and say,
that's right,
really
I'm
great
too much of a workaholic. Exactly. And so I'm the worst meditator, and I'm much too workaholic to do it properly.
You just work too hard at your meditating, maybe.
Bit by bit, Sharon has made a dent
Compensate.
in getting me to count my breath and like calm down and be in the moment and observe those inner thoughts and don't worry so much about the Tibet and don't worry so much about the people suffering and don't take the whole world burden on your shoulders, etc., etc.
Well, you do go a lot on in the book about, self-preoccupation being this evil and other preoccupation being this great gift.
Of course,
so you are otherwise very preoccupied.
Yes, it's true. Well, that's Shantideva's great thing.
Yeah.
That if you can't meditate properly and forget about yourself, then at least you can worry about other people, and then you sort of get distracted from your self-preoccupation. And since that's sort of like the shortcut to being enlightened, because even though you're not enlightened, since enlightened beings only care about other people because they themselves are completely satisfied, they become sort of they have realized emptiness, as we call it, or selflessness, through an experience of bliss. The only way you can realize selflessness is not conceptually, but by melting into it, and that gives you bliss. So they are completely self-satisfied, actually, enlightened people, and therefore they only worry about others. So a selfish person like me, who's always worrying, if I focus the worry on others, then I imitate the blissful person. And when I talk about it, I feel blissful. And then when I don't talk about it, I'm miserable as usual, So don't worry, I don't pretend to be enlightened. I'm probably more miserable than any of you.
Oh, is there competitive misery?
There you go.
All right.
Very good.
So Sharon, why is compassion the key to happiness?
I think compassion, first of all...
One of the keys.
One of the keys to happiness.
There are many roads you guys are running down.
One of the things we talk about, both in terms of mindfulness and compassion, is that if we let go of trying to control our experience, but work with really radically transforming our relationship to our experience, and first of all, that's something we can do, however much we insist.
But that's a huge point you make. It's about changing your perspective to your experience.
Yeah, and changing relationship instead of holding on, pushing away, and feeling so bitterly alone and isolated, realizing that we live in a community of beings and that we all
They're all
want to be
bitterly
happy.
alone.
Everybody may feel bitterly alone, but the reality, according to Dr. Thurman, is that in truth, we're all connected. And so we really work a lot with that because it's realistic. It's something we can do instead of feeling like, I've decided, I've weighed all the pros and cons, and I'm never going to be angry again, or I've grieved long enough, or whatever. We don't have that kind of control, but we can change our lives completely by changing how we relate to all of our experience. And then compassion is this beautiful state that's actually very generative. I thought, like as Bob said, I thought we would get in trouble with the title because of the word love, not because of the word enemies. Because so many times people think of love or compassion as something sort of silly, or you're going to be a doormat, you're going to let anything happen, you're not going to fight, you're going to lose all strength and determination. And I often think, like, what a time we live in that our sense of love or compassion has kind of degenerated to that point, instead of realizing the forces that they actually are, the incredible powers that they are. And so we can walk in the land of compassion for a very long way and realize its strength and its power, and realize that, we can be coming from a compassionate place, which is a place of connection to ourselves, and make changes from that place. We can have compassion for someone else and still be very clear, well, I'm not giving in, or I'm not giving up, or I'm not letting you move into my apartment, or whatever it might be. But within ourselves, we feel whole.
Yeah, like a mom has fierce compassion to see to avoiding the suffering of her young, for example. And then it's like Einstein said, one has to expand that to be the mom of other beings, Be like a mom with other beings. That's the Buddha is defined as one who thinks of every being as if they were his only beloved child, Poor guy. But apparently he can manage it, supposedly. He or she, they're female Buddhas also.
Thank you, sir.
They are.
Sharon, you also said that when you see others as enemies, you become an enemy to yourself. So how did you come to that, this idea that objectifying another objectifies yourself? Or?
Well, some of it I think has to do with that sense of aloneness as we feel more and more and more separate. And some of it has to do with giving over too much of our own life energy to others, so that we're defined by the way others see us. We are exhilarated with praise and we're despondent with blame, and we think, oh, now I'm going to do the perfect thing. I'm going to say it so well, everyone is going to love it, and I'm never going to receive any kind of criticism. And of course, that's just not so, because people respond from wherever they're at as well. It's not that people come in a vacuum to hear us or receive our gift or whatever it might be. And so it's just wisdom to realize that life in every way within ourselves and interpersonally brings us ups and downs, and that's how things are. But we can find a measure of peace anyway. And so rather than thinking of the airlines as our enemy and the neighbor as our enemy and Verizon perhaps, or whatever it might be that our struggle is with, we can realize, okay, these are people and everybody's going through their own thing, and maybe there's a way that I can interact that will help me get what I want. It's not that we give up on that, but it's not the same thing as just feeling so embattled all the time.
I think, you mentioned that Bob was going to debunk the whole concept of the enemy, which I think you do very well in the book, Dad, of sort of helping to break it down that the other is not, in fact, even another person.
Right.
Ultimately, you transcend the concept of the other and any separation between them and you.
Yes, if you develop the mind transformation practice, then they say you have no enemy, because even someone harms you, you benefit from it. You manage to turn any adversity or any negative thing into something positive for your own evolutionary development, and you defend the magical shield of patience, they say, where nothing bothers you in a way, no matter what it is. And of course the Buddhists, because the Buddhists have this idea that is so weird to us, but it's so commonplace to them, of the future life. And these things are played out over a multiplicity of lives. So the guarding the mind from hatred is considered more important than guarding the body, actually. Because the hatred will drive you into a very bad future life. You'll be reborn in Jurassic Park as a raptor. A much better body for an animal of hatred, like a hunting, violent animal, or Tyrannosaurus or something. Would be human beings, the fake thing that militaristic societies do, that human beings are basically violent, is ridiculous. We have no teeth.
You don't think we have an animal mind?
Nail. Yeah, we have a limbic, we have a little tiny, slime,
it's
tiny.
Pretty big, actually.
No, down inside there's that little limbic brain. It's tiny. What's all that's left? There's no more crocodile teeth, no scales, no claws.
Some people do a pretty good impersonation of them.
Yeah, you can step up in a costume, or you can be Kill Bill and you can slaughter 1 billion people in the movies. But in fact, we are not really very capable like that. It's just because we're clever, we can then imitate violence. But actually, we're gentle people. I always like to say that
that's not true.
Human beings
are not gentle.
Yes, very
They've
gentle.
driven half the species into extinction.
Listen, the reason that we can talk to each other is that we don't eat each other the minute we meet.
It's
animals.
It's not
they
far
eat
off.
who they meet. They don't have time to chat. It's eat or be eaten. That's the animal level. That's why they don't talk, because they have no time. It's just munch. Human beings were sitting around in some cave while some tiger was outside going grrr, and then they were chatting.
That's because they had no fur.
And then the men had to listen to the women.
So human beings talk because we have no fur.
That's right.
It's cold.
There you go. And we don't have very strong teeth, et cetera. So,
seriously.
So basically, the human being is kind of social, But it's not an absolute nature. We're capable of being more destructive than any animal. But we can blow up the whole planet, you know. But we, by our cleverness, you know. But if we use that cleverness in our real nature, which is to be gentle and interconnected, we can become Buddhas. And you know, the thing about my next book, Buddhas have more fun. But I don't know that personally, but I know it by definition, so I'm going to work on that. But I'm sure they have more fun. At least I'm sure of that by theory, you know, and by observing them. And why does everybody like to have a Buddha ashtray? And why do they like to have a Buddha in the garden? Because the guy is smiling, like big grin on his face. He's sitting there like this, but he's smiling. He's not looking freaked out. So that's why people like them, you know, and they do have more fun. My latest thing is Buddhas are kind of aliens. They are like a Spock figure who came down.
Okay.
And he's trying to get people to cool out.
We're at the Y, Dad. We're at the Y.
You know, Spock and Kirk are always going down to these planets that are grade B, you know, and they're like have some dictatorship and they're arresting people and torturing them. And they go down there and they say, oh, well, we can't share any technology with you guys because you're still like beating up on people. And then they're much, you know, they're trying to like civilize them. And I think that's my latest thing.
Excellent.
Well, I like it. It goes with your naturally radiant mind.
Yeah, something like that.
Well, I think it's you, Sharon, quoting that the Buddha said the mind is by nature radiant.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
it's shining. Yeah. It is because of visiting forces that we suffer. Mm-hmm. So, you wanted to talk a little bit about that? Is that the human being is at its purest, restful state, radiant and full of light?
Yes. The mind is naturally radiant and pure. The mind is shining. It's because of visiting forces that we suffer, which is a quotation I've always loved from the Buddha. And there are two parts of it that are most significant. One is that these forces are just visiting, whether it's greed or hatred or fear or jealousy.
Forces, emotions.
Yeah, they're visiting, and they're not inherent to our being. They're adventitious. They're born out of condition.
Adventitious, that's what they usually say, yes.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, visiting is unusual, but that's interesting.
Translation. You know, and I love that sense because right away I could imagine myself sitting happily at home, minding my own business and hearing this knock at the door. And I open the door and there's greed or jealousy. And I fling open the door and I say, welcome home. Like forgetting who actually lives there, that this is just a visitor. Or, of course, we can be really desperate and ashamed and afraid and kind of shut the door in the face of this visitor, trying to pretend we never heard the knock. And they somehow seem to find their way in the window or down the chimney or somehow. And so one of the great skills of meditation is knowing how to be when you open that door, so that your relationship, again, you know, to that emotional state can be different. You can be present, you can be aware, you don't have to let them take over, and you also don't have to be freaked out. Like, oh my God, I've been meditating for all this time and look who just came back. So that's one of the really important things about the statement. And the other part, which always touched me, was the Buddha didn't say it's because of these forces that we're miserable creatures, we're horrible people, we're just awful. He said it's because of visiting forces that we suffer. And so making that translation, even in our experience where we see our own anger, we see our own fear, and instead of saying bad and wrong and terrible and wretched, we say, that's painful. That's a state of pain. And that's the beginning of compassion.
For yourself.
For yourself. Which is often the beginning of compassion for others.
I think that's a nice segue because you haven't touched upon the fourth of the enemies, which is self-loathing.
Yeah, we call the super secret one.
The super secret, and you say in the book that it doesn't matter whether you come from the outside in of depersonalizing others until you finally get into, I guess, is self-loathing the depersonalization of oneself.
Well, all the cultures on the planet try to tell everybody that they're worthless because they're run by authoritarian leaders, you know, the Emperor of China, or like the king of this, or Herod, you know, in Israel, or, you know. And so their whole thing is to make people feel worthless and weak.
So centuries
powerless,
of dominance.
so they can domineer them.
Right, right.
And then the religions founded by people who are liberators, really, Jesus and Muhammad and Buddha, they were liberators, but then the institutions get relied with the state, and then they turn it around into another way of, oh, you're a sinner, or you're ignorant, or Buddhism even is taught that way. You never can understand anything, you lay people, you're hopeless. And so that deep cultural imprint of our inner unworthiness is, we call it the super secret one, because we all build up this big defense and we say, I'm so self-confident, and even people will be arrogant and they will act like they're very proud and very secure, but it's to cover up an inner feeling that they're nothing and nobody. And so they're trying to assert that themselves all sorts of ways, And so that's the deepest one, where we have to overcome that one in order to find that inner radiance. And that inner radiance, prabhasvara is the Sanskrit, or prabhasara. They don't like consonant clusters in Pali. So they go prabhasara, but it's prabhasvara in Sanskrit. And it means a clear light, like a luminosity. That is your nature. If you find your real cellular nature, your real subatomic nature, the level where you're made of light.
Your spiritual gene.
You find that you realize that even this looks like a flesh and blood, slightly decrepit body, but actually it's made of light. We're all everything is made of light, actually. There's a realization like that. When you let the mind relax into it, then everything appears like luminous, like that.
Well, Dad always explained, emptiness and reality, that, if you really break down an atom and you see these little dots and this empty space in the middle, so that really, actually, that it's a complete matter is an illusion, right?
Yes, that's right. Although the real emptiness, when you break it down and then everything disappears. And then the big mistake you can make is the one that materialist scientists make, which is when things dissolve under analysis, they jump up and say, Eureka, I've got nothing.
Do they?
I proved that that's what's really there, is nothing.
But isn't that what you're trying to prove?
Which is ridiculous. There's no nothing. They just didn't find what they were looking for. And they say that, and then we go saying, I've got nothing. But nobody's got nothing. And nobody's going to be nothing. I guarantee 100%. None of you are going to be nothing. So don't plan on letting your problems drop into nothing just by dying. Everything will go on, because something.
Your suffering will continue.
Law of conservation. That's right. Or your happiness.
It was a little doleful, that message.
Your suffering, your happiness, whatever it is, will continue. So make it happy. That's the key thing. And the thing about the self-loathing, discovering that super secret enemy, is if you discover that and really uproot it, which I don't claim to have done even myself, but even after all these years, but you will, only way to overcome the fear of happiness is to discover that. Because when we feel extreme bliss.
Fear of happiness.
Yeah, when we feel great bliss, we feel afraid. Bliss makes you afraid because bliss melts you. And then you melt, I'm going to die or something. It's no wonder that in French, orgasm is called the petit mort, the little death, So when you melt, you feel fear. And that has to do with the fact that you feel, I don't deserve to be happy. And the reality might be nothing. And if I melt, I might be nothing. And that's that deep inner mistake that we make, and which modern scientific materialists have elevated to a dogma of their profession, actually. They've elevated that. Meanwhile, it's a sign of slight tinge of insanity on their part, I'm sorry to say. Slight insanity. I had a neuroscientist one time tell me that he had proven that there's nothing at death because he'd had an EEG, fMRI on a brain of a dead person, and he was sure that there was nothing in there. So it took me a few days to laugh. He was so intent about it. The idea that they have a hold and have proven nothing, and for discovering nothing, they expect Nobel Prizes.
Well, maybe nothing is bliss.
No, clear light. Radiance is bliss.
We've been handed a question. Shall we try?
Have we answered it? I don't remember.
Know.
I'm sorry, I'm misleading.
Oh, sorry. It's just letting me that we weren't going to be handed a question.
What?
No, there won't be questions on cards. So whenever you're ready.
Are we having questions from the crowd?
They'll happen. Questions will arise naturally.
Oh, okay. So we finished our own questions.
Well, I think you have a lot more in this book than you've touched upon, so.
Well, we want people to read it. We're not expecting to conclude it. But believe me, it's a wonderful experience to be interviewed by my daughter. She's like a professor. I'm like an idiot. She's like a professor.
No, there's so many wonderful things, and towards at the end of the book, you do also share, these wonderful techniques of empathy meditation or sympathetic joy. Do you want to discuss a little bit about the fact that these things are a practice you can do? They're not just intellectual ideas, right?
Yeah. Well, I think that is extremely important because the whole movement from just holding these qualities like compassion as abstract values and breathing life into them and making them real is the whole point. Because otherwise it's just like a monument to someone else's experience. And you think, wow, fantastic, the Buddha, whatever year that was, sat under a tree in India. It's too bad I live in Manhattan, which is so noisy. Or, I can't do it, everyone else can do it and I can't. And that moment where we say, I want to see what it's like for me. And, I may stumble, it may not be that easy, but I'm going to make it real for me. That's the whole point.
That is
and the particular practice about sympathetic joy I find very interesting. That's a quality that's talked about in the Buddhist tradition of actually feeling happiness for the happiness of others. Mm-hmm. Instead of witnessing someone's success or good fortune and falling sway to the voice which so often arises within us, which says, "Ooh, I wish you didn't have so much going for you right now." You don't have to lose everything, but if the light could just dim a bit, I'd feel better. And we just fall.
Can you lead? Do we have time? Can you lead a little?
Well, we'll see.
Right now?
We'll see.
Do you have time? Sharon, do you want to lead us?
Maybe. And so, in contrast to that, feeling sympathetic joy is actually being happy for the happiness of someone else rather than feeling something's been taken away from us or feeling threatened or frightened. And here too, I think there's a big cultural burden because I think we live in a culture by and large of feeling or being taught that we will feel better about ourselves by demeaning others, by putting others down. And so we see that all the time, and it takes a lot.
We see it, but it's done. It's such a funny thing. It's done in such a regular practice. It's part of comedy.
That's right.
Insult. And yet, if you ever put it in front of someone that they actually are negative like that, they are appalled.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But we live and breathe it.
Yeah, we do all the time. And
we laugh at it. We participate. You talk about bullying in this book as well.
Yeah. And so I think to step away and to want to be different is the most important thing. And then there are practices where we actually, we confront, we challenge some of those ideas like, there's a limited amount of happiness in this world, and the more someone else has, the less there's going to be
That just
for
seems
me.
Crazy when you look at it. Right?
I know, it's insane. Or that prize, that praise, that accolade was heading right toward me, and somehow you intervened.
Stole it.
You stole it, exactly.
Just right.
Yeah, it's mine.
Like a sandwich.
Yeah. So a lot of the practices is a direct confrontation, just looking at those ideas and those thoughts and realizing that's crazy.
So the psychological scarcity and trying to sort of break it down.
Yeah.
Tara Tuku used to say that the lazy person's way to accumulate merit is to joyfully congratulate mentally every good thing that any other person does. Like read the paper and look to see anything people achieved. As the antidote also to envy, or competitiveness, which is what we normally react when somebody else gets so good. And the lazy person, if you don't do it yourself, somebody else did it, and then you feel really joy, you get some of the merit of that accomplishment.
Yeah, it's fabulous, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is nice. And on the other hand, there's a slight warning in that if somebody robs a bank or does something, if you sort of think, gee whiz, how did they do that?
That's awesome.
Really? You get some of the negative.
If they don't go to jail, they buy the rights to the story.
Crime of it.
Buy the rights from jail.
How your mind works.
I thought there was one last thing. I thought because there's so many different tones in this share stuff that you guys share. I thought you explained this particularly well, Dad, and I wanted to read this because it's so sort of one of your logical sort of processes, but. You're more clear than sometimes you are in this one. Which is basically this concept that tolerance, which is another big word, talking about tolerating others, being the relief from suffering, and you put this kind of nice little path together. Of course, it's never too short when it's written by my dad, but tolerance is the small beginning of freedom from being irritated by pain. We build that tolerance into real patience, which gets stronger and stronger under the pressures of everyday life. Tolerating discomfort gives us the ability to endure, which leads us to an inner release from the force of circumstances, making real happiness possible. We develop patience not to experience fleeting pleasure, but to develop transcendent detachment. Transcendent detached tolerance, now you switch the words. Transcendent detachment, transcendent tolerance means freedom from fear of any kind of suffering. Nothing that comes our way throws us. This is the only happiness that endures. I almost got through that properly. Transcendent tolerance.
Read it, it's enjoyable.
But you give a logical explanation here of, a lot of people hear this word tolerance. They want to be tolerant. I should be more tolerant, and I'm tolerant enough, right? But you explain very well here that this idea of endurance is the root. Tolerant endurance is the root to actually being able to experience life in a happy way.
Sure. Ancient Buddhist slogan: no pain, no gain.
So what is transcendent tolerance?
Well, transcendent is where you really have reached the point where you are free of attachment to anything that can absorb any harm. So therefore, there's nothing you cannot be harmed.
So you tolerate everything, basically.
Yes. For example, it's like Neo in the Matrix. Neo in the Matrix had reached a point where nothing could harm him because he was the whole Matrix. So he had realized he was one with everything. Why I love that film is not really the shooting and the this and that, but it's that's adolescent. But what I love about it is the living in an illusory reality, and then because of the believability of the sci-fi setup, people get the experience of being in the reality and yet realizing that you're just a computer simulation. You're made of light, really, made of pure energy. And so because of that, he can't be harmed. And the third one, he finally defeats the bad guy, who he has actually, who's almost close to him in that achievement, but because he is not quite, the bad guy is still separate and still wants to dominate. But when he merges with Neo, he thinks he's going to absorb Neo, who's going to be a dominator like him, but he becomes a giver like Neo. He becomes transcendently tolerant, and so he becomes Neo instead, and that's how Neo defeats him. Because the one who is completely open, able to melt, and finds the bliss in melting, and thereby is unharmable, because they are the entire matrix at the same time as acting for the good within it, they are transcendently tolerant. So they transcend any harm, that means.
So that's your route to oneness. But you give a good path here that, through tolerance.
Thank you, Sidi. I'm glad.
It's
just a real pleasure to hear your own child read that.
Hope.
It's really nice.
There's hope to there being some value to patience.
Yes.
A true value.
Yes, which I don't have, and I keep trying to. I've improved over the years, haven't I? I've improved a little bit.
Certainly.
A little.
Very much.
Still a little impatient, I get.
Well, no one's perfect.
Buddha is, actually.
There we are. We found a few Buddhas.
Yeah.
Perfect Buddhas.
There will be some Buddhas.
The Buddha in you.
We have the hope of being... Actually, it's important for us to have the hope that there is some kind of perfection that we can achieve. It's important to have that hope. It gives us a thing to strive for. In the midst of enjoying this and that, the idea that there is perfection in the world, that the world naturally is perfect, actually. If we wasn't messed with, it would be perfect, is a very different view from the idea that it's awful, but there's some omnipotent being who sort of made it like that to teach us something, and then they're perfect, and they'll kind of put us in the choir and we'll be happy later. There's all these models, or the materialist thing that it's all nothing and everything we do is meaningless and pointless. And those models are, in case there's evidence for them, well, all the better, we'll examine that. But the Buddhist thing is that, Buddhist scientific thing is that reality is such that if left alone, it's perfect. So if you let go of it all, you'll be all right, type of thing. Which puts you in a different framework, actually, puts you in a positive context. context of natural radiance, with the negative things only being casual, accidental visitors, who therefore can be embraced within the natural perfection, actually, rather than feared. That's another important point. Getting rid of anger and hatred is not a matter of just suppressing it and making it an enemy that you got rid of. When you get rid of being taken over by anger, the energy of anger, which is a kind of heat, a kind of forcefulness, you can use for fierce love and fierce compassion, because it'll never be destructive, because it will never be guided into a destructive way. It'll be guided into something creative, always. And those energy, like anger transmuted, is intelligence, actually. Because intelligence wants to take things apart, to analyze them, to understand them. Anger wants to take them apart, to destroy them. But intelligence wants to take them apart, to understand how they are put together. It doesn't want to harm them, wants to improve how they are. So even desire can be, that's then Tantra. Envy even, it has a green color in Tantra, and it becomes the all-accomplishing or the wonder-working wisdom. When people rejoice in each other's achievement, then they can cooperate and work together. When they work together, there's nothing they can't get done. When they're competing and envying each other and each one wanting to go in front of them, then nothing gets done, because all they do is, I want to do it, and if I can't do it, I'm going to destroy it. Sort of routine, right? Mm-hmm. And so even envy can be transmuted. I'm not sure how, because it's a sort of sickening energy. But but apparently that's the color green.
There's admiration and envy, right? There's some admiration.
Yes, that's right, I guess. Oh, thank you. Yes.
But underneath it all.
Yes.
Maybe
true.
should we take a question or two?
Yeah, sure. Any questions? Or were they written ones, or are people?
No.
We have a light. Oh, there you are. Oh.
Yes, people.
It's going to be a friendly free-for-all.
I felt so lost seeing the darkness out there.
I know, you're completely
There's all those smiling faces.
unseeable. Hey.
Any question? Anyone? Yes.
Hi, thank you so far. It's been really awesome. I wanted to know, is it possible to love your enemy when you no longer are in contact with them? When there was like intense betrayal, deceit, and horrible betrayal.
I have trouble hearing, but you heard it. So
I think we were supposed to repeat the question a little bit.
Oh, right.
So the question was, how do you, once you've separated from the person who's harmed you and really injured you, betrayed you, and really hurt you, how do you deal with trying to deal with that away from them once you've departed from them?
Stay away.
Yeah.
Step one.
I think it's very important not to confuse like the inner work we do, not to be consumed with someone else's actions, or even worse, defined by someone else's actions. That's the work of freedom, and that's different than inviting them back into your life or into your home or having contact. That's a separate choice based on discernment and mindfulness of context. Is it safe? Is it wise to have contact or to resume contact? But within ourselves, how we can go through the list of someone's faults, and then we go through it again, and then we go through it again. We haven't discovered new faults. It's the same list, but we go through it again, and we go through it again. And like so much of our own life energy is now given over to this other person and their behavior. So we want to recapture that. We want to be whole. We want to be free. But that actually doesn't have any implication about the one correct action to take,
right.
in reality.
Yeah, it makes me think of Martin Luther King when he was beaten up on that bridge in Birmingham, I think it was. And then he went off and did other things. I think they had the march and they did a lot of other things. And then they were going to go back to that bridge. And his friend, I think Lewis tells the story, and Dr. Lewis, and he said that people were saying to him, well, you have to you need anger to go across there. You have to hate those people, and then you will confront them. And King said, no, I'm going to go there, and I'm nervous about it, but I won't carry the burden of hatred. That's too bitter a burden to bear, is what he said. So in a way, if they've harmed you and you've been hurt by it, then if you've gotten away from them, that's good. And if you're carrying the hurt still in your mind, then you're hurting yourself. to them hurting it. So the key there is to somehow, the way of empowering yourself is to somehow say, well, whatever it was, I must have had a part in it. The Buddhist thing is very helpful because you had previous life experience. So you can always blame yourself as the victim by saying, I hurt that person in a previous life. That's really nice. Even the sociologist, German sociologist Max Weber really liked that. He said that the multi-life perspective gives you the best method of moral accounting that humanity ever devised. He didn't believe in it, of course, but he just said it was made things fit, injustice fit. But the point is, it's used in Buddhism so that you can then say, well, I used that hurt that was given to me to expiate whatever negative thing there is about myself, and I no longer will bother being bitter about and resenting and carrying the burden of the person who hurt me. Of course, I'll stay away from them. Doesn't mean I will invite them, but I won't carry around a grudge and a hatred and a secret wish to revenge, and make that the driving force of my life is revenge, because then that just makes more trouble for me. It's not for the sake. Forgiving is not for the sake of the forgiven. It's for the sake of the forgiver, because it frees them from dragging on the suffering that they received. Right? Is that cool? I think that works.
Beautiful.
And we don't have the future life thing in our culture yet, but we'll get it if I can only live another 20 or 30 years. It's so obvious, actually, worldwide, and it's the majority of human beings are aware of it. And this idea that we came out of nothing and we go into nothing is just completely irrational, actually, and leads to the irresponsibility of the materialist culture that is currently wrecking the planet, actually. But that's another story. Another question.
Thank you. My name is Ronnie, and you speak about the inner experience, which we all react to. That's in part what our life is. It's our inner experience. But I'm curious what advice you might have in getting past the point of when you are stuck on something and you can't let go or you don't let go. What skill set does one need to let go, to move on, to have a more positive experience? I'm curious to know your reaction to that.
So the question was about those moments when we actually cannot let go, we're just stuck, and what skill set do we need in order to accomplish that, to be able to let go and move on? And I love that you use the phrase skill set, because I think that's really what it is. Sometimes we think of compassion, I don't know exactly what it is. Somehow we have this conditioning that we think of something like compassion as a gift, and you either have it or you don't, and if you don't, you're out of luck, or maybe it's a spontaneous emotional expression. But in Eastern psychology, absolutely, it's something that is trainable. It's a skill, and it's seen as trainable because attention is trainable, and it depends on how we pay attention. That's what will be the ground out of which a quality like compassion can emerge. And so some of what we do is really, it's a little bit like what I talked about before. Instead of seeing our stuckness and our bitterness and our anger as bad and wrong and terrible, we really tune into how painful it is. And that's the birth of compassion for ourselves, which doesn't mean weakness, and it doesn't mean condoning something. But it's really such incredible tenderness and care for ourselves, and then we decide what we need to do.
So once you acknowledge, you then can possibly let go and move on.
Well, you can. I mean, what the comment was, once you acknowledge, then you can possibly let go and move on. And we let go, which doesn't mean we hurl something away, or we try to repress it or deny it. It means that we care about ourselves so much that we make some choices. And that doesn't mean that for people, a lot of people, that there's going to be like the one breakthrough experience, that it's all done. I've worked through all my anger at so-and-so in one shot, and that was a great sitting, and now I'm free. It's not like that. We fall back, and then we pick ourselves up, and we go forward, because we understand where our deepest happiness is to be found. And then we fall down again, and then we start over. And if anything, meditation teaches us as a skill, it's being able to begin again. We're present, we're lost, we start over. We're here, we get distracted, we start over. What's that?
I'm a new meditator.
That's excellent.
120 days.
Uh-huh.
Very new at it.
That's fabulous. So her comment is that she's been meditating for 120 days. That's great.
Oh,
Yes, that's
yeah.
great.
In one setting, in one retreat, you mean?
No. She started
Oh, no.
120 days ago.
Oh, 120. But you've been counting the days? You're really well organized. That's fantastic. You're going to definitely be free of that injury or whatever.
Yeah, no, that's fabulous.
really
That's
good.
really great.
You could join these two and join the competitive meditation club.
That's right. Well, then you know about, and others might not, that what mindfulness that Sharon teaches is where you learn to, counting your breath, and then you see all these different thoughts that arise. Among them would be the thought that would not be letting go of that injury, and you learn to dismount from a train of thought. And then you learn to see the different variety of trains of thought. And at first, when you do that, you suddenly feel, oh, this is really bad because now I'm having so many more trains of thought. But you're not. You're actually becoming aware that there are all these different levels of thought constantly distracting going on in your mind. And you learn the freedom to choose. I always like to say, it's like you are a TV set that has finally achieved clickerhood. So you can change the channel, you can mute the commercial, you can learn to change channels. And you can change channel over that injury and that betrayal and that horrible thing that person did. And that doesn't change that they did that, although, one thing I always want to say about the people who've injured us in the past, because of the possibility and the danger of a future life, never be too harsh with your exes. Because you will fall in love with them and marry them again in the next life. And then you don't want to have a bad breakup in that next life either. So, try to reconcile yourself about the exes. Although stay away from them too, it's also good. But be happy about them on their own,
Is someone?
That's the thing, yes.
Well, I think the lady second over right there was the person. I think there are also some people there.
Hi, I'm wondering, well, first of all, I look forward to reading the book. But I'm wondering, what do you suggest for seeing other people who suffer that you love and they're not dealing with their own suffering, thus it makes one sad to see their own suffering, the other person's suffering. What can you do with the suffering caused by seeing someone else suffer?
So the question was, what can you do by the sorrow or the suffering that we experience by seeing someone else suffer and not being able to fix it? Is the other part of it, is recognizing a certain degree of powerlessness. And I think, that my favorite word of all, I don't know how many times I used it in the book, my very favorite word is poignancy. I think life is very poignant, and particularly because of that. We can love someone so much and care about them so much, and not just because we're nosy, but we pretty well see what they might do to be a whole lot happier, and we can't make it so. We just don't have that kind of control over the unfolding of events. It doesn't mean we can't do anything, and we should, try and be there and say whatever we say and be as skillful as we can, but there needs to be a kind of equanimity or balance, not apathy, not indifference, but real balance. Because first of all, what we see in front of us isn't necessarily the end of the story. It's this iteration, right? And if we do something or say something, maybe it's like planting a seed, and we can't insist that the seed bear fruit. We can't successfully insist that the seed bear fruit in the way we want in the time frame we have. But we need to plant the seed. We need to be there and as genuine and caring away as possible. And then understand life is very big, and that we cannot insist, we cannot dominate or control someone else's choices. And it's one thing to feel the poignancy and feel the sorrow. It's another thing to feel exhausted and to feel overcome and to feel despair, which, if we look at that state, then often the secret ingredient is feeling we should be able to fix it. We should be able to control it. And that leads nowhere. So the reality of seeing things as they are actually gives us a kind of balance so we can hang in there even longer and be there in a more beautiful and genuine way.
They say that false compassion is, or rather, ineffectual and exhausting compassion, which is coupled with ignorance and with a lack of wisdom about the nature of reality. And the first level of compassion, which is stirred by seeing the suffering of another, is coupled with the wisdom of impermanence, the first level of real compassion. And the reason I think perhaps that they say that is that knowledge of impermanence is awareness of the changeability, what you're saying, and that they may be suffering, but there will be change. So it isn't a hopeless compassion, a kind of, oh, the poor thing, but coupled with the idea that they'll always be that way, and therefore a feeling of helplessness, and that they're helpless and you're helpless, sort of freeze-framing their suffering into some sort of thing, and separating yourself from it in a way by feeling that it's like that. It has the formulation of compassion, oh, the poor thing, but it's a kind of impotent pity that is not helpful to either the person who feels it or the person who, and even it makes the person who's suffering even annoyed. So you have to cultivate wisdom. And the first level of wisdom is called the wisdom of impermanence, which has subtle and coarse forms, gross and subtle forms. And the subtle form is being aware that things change momentarily all the time. And then that can build up to other levels where maybe one of the keys if you build your wisdom more is you'll remain happy. We somehow have the wrong idea that feeling compassion must be, if we're to be genuinely compassionate, we must be agonized over the suffering of another. But actually our own agonizing over it doesn't help them. Mm. And if we really realize the impermanent nature, that things will change, etc., that's so on, we'll maybe see it from another angle, and they will at least feel that we are not dragged into it with them. And if we flaunt that will really annoy them and will be cruel. But if we just don't flaunt it, but we feel it, that fact that we are next to them without being sucked into their misery will help them, they say, I think, something like that. There's two other levels of compassion. But the first one where it starts is impermanence, right? Mm-hmm.
And there's a close connection between generosity and compassion, because it's like generosity is a spirit. And we know we can give a gift in all kinds of different ways. We could certainly give a gift and think, oh, you have that great thing, maybe I'll give you this and you'll give me that. And so it's really a medium of exchange, or thank me, would you, and thank me again, and whatever it is, or we can just give it, which is a very different thing. And that kind of giving has to come from a place of inner abundance. If we feel we could never do enough, that what we do is going to make what we give is going to make no difference, it's so meager, it's so measly, then it's not going to be a freely given gift. And so that's also a skill that we cultivate in the deepening of compassion, is that kind of offering.
What you make me think of is lately I'm becoming sort of soft on the British. As an American, I always had a thing about the Brits.
Have you been holding a grudge?
Yeah, about the Brits,
Since
No, I have
1776
as a gringo, I have this thing.
The Boston
But
Tea
lately, what you made me think of...
Who are your ancestors?
Who knows?
He's in denial about
Is he
his
British?
British background.
Yeah.
Who knows?
German and
But the
British.
point is that, I have a British thing. I
It's
know.
self-loathing. Okay.
I have some sort of...
Yeah, okay.
My bloodline is sort of British, but I think I was a Mongolian in those days. But my point is that I've really gotten to appreciate the British thing of offering someone a cup of tea. The old cup of tea routine, it probably is what was the secret of the British Empire, The bombs just fell, the house fell down, St. James was just blasted by a V-1 rocket of Hitler, etc. And then they sit around, they clean things up, and they patch up some people, and then they have a cup of tea. They give them a cup of tea. That miserable person, offer them a cup of tea.
Well, they work with their anger very well, then, you could say.
Maybe. It's a cup of tea thing. It's like something a little... It's like affirming that whatever it is might pass, we'll have a cup of tea, right? The worst things happen in Downton Abbey, although I didn't like that auto accident. I don't like that. That sucked, that auto accident. and they should be
Wait,
disqualified.
I've never seen it.
Okay,
I've
I
never
won't
seen
tell.
the
Some
show.
other people have
tell.
questions.
Nothing.
But that was no good. But otherwise, the cup of tea is good. I'm
Okay.
sorry. Maybe it's Downton Abbey.
There's someone over there.
Yes.
I have a loud voice. I'll just talk. So I heard you say about how you can't control your feelings, which people say a lot, and obviously anger is one of those feelings that you can't control. Personally, I have a lot of problems controlling my anger, and being told that I can't control it doesn't help. So I understand. I like this skill set method, and I understand like the meditation part of it. But what are and I know I have to buy the book to find out the rest.
No, you don't.
What are some of the other methods that we can go about to let go of revenge, manage our anger?
Meditation is good. Let me say one thing. One of the key things about getting rid of any addiction is realizing that it's not good for you.
Right.
That's the resolve that is bad. That harms me, it harms others, right? They all say, the person who drinks, the person who's hooked on something, they have rationalizations of why, this is good, this is okay, I've got it under control, it's all right, it won't really hurt me. Maybe it's good, I don't know. So the first step is very first thing in the skill set is, again, a wisdom thing. It's looking through experience at how anger has served you or anybody else in the world, and coming to the decision that it's something I should be free of. And here, there's a very key point, which we discuss a lot in here, which is that just being forceful in opposing what is wrong is not necessarily anger. There can be a kind of way of being forceful where you're totally in control and you're making a judgment and you're just opposing something. You're being critical, or you're you're putting your body in front of something to stop an injury or something like that. And that's done with a high energy. And that's not what we're talking about, the real anger that's destructive. The one that's destructive is where it takes you over, and they have all these neuroscientific studies and psychological studies where you lose 80% of your good judgment, you become reckless and careless, you overdo it, you hurt yourself, you hurt other people, because you're out of control. Your body and mind and speech are a tool of this hating energy that completely makes you, senseless in a way. Makes you mad. We have the expression mad. It's when you get really mad that is bad. So the first step is to decide that it's harmful to you and others. And then there's another second step, is to understand the mechanism. That Shantideva has a beautiful verse. He says, when I understand that the fuel of anger is frustration, a sense of mental discomfort, and then I let it build up inside and get more and more uncomfortable, and then it blows up and takes me over. When you get to observe that, and that you need meditation, I think, the skill set of meditating to become really aware of how that works. But here I want to say one thing. Women in our society are socialized to take too much punishment. And we guys are socialized to be too pushy and act like we're supposed to. And so women tend to think that they need a forcefulness to counter that, to assert themselves. And they do, and they should do that. But if they use let the socialization so that they're polite as the idiot rambles on, and they're sort of feeling more and more frustrated as the idiot is repeating some news item from one of the news channels, and they're just repeating what they were brainwashed into repeat. And then the woman blows up and reacts, and then that makes the guy madder, and then it just unravels in a negative way. So the key there is to assert yourself earlier, when you still have a sense of humor and you're still cheerful, and like my wife used to do when I would get mad and explain things to her, and like about how awful something is, and she would say, "Why don't you shut up ahead of time before we're both mad?" And Uma can attest, she is very quick at the rapier, humorous statement that's forceful before she's mad. And sometimes afterwards, that's different. But before. And then the guy can take it because there's a humorous element to it. And although at first it's like, my male momentum is being not honored or something, so then there can be a pomposity that can be immobilized, but you basically will restrain yourself, and then they can go on a better plane. So the women, without women asserting themselves, this planet will not survive. But if you wait to assert yourself out of anger and getting mad, you will do so unskillfully and it will not be effective. So please assert yourself. Be rude ahead of time. Use your intuition and tell us to shut up ahead of time. And I will now shut up.
But I also want to say that when people such as myself suggest that we cannot control what we're feeling, like we can't control our anger, that means we can't stop it arising. That doesn't mean we can't control how it manifests or we can't affect what we're going to do with it, which we absolutely can and have to, especially if it's been damaging or destructive in some way. But if you think about how we so often blame ourselves for what we feel, which we cannot stop. One of my meditation teachers said to me once, early teachers, because I was all flipped out about something that was coming up in my mind, he said, something like, why are you so upset about this thought that has come up in your mind? Did you invite it? Did you say at 3:15, I'd like to be filled with self-hatred, please? Like, no. But when conditions come together for something to arise, it will arise. That doesn't mean we just have to fall into it and get overcome by it. And there's the key difference. But we also don't have to blame ourselves so bitterly. You know, I've been meditating for 40 years. Why do I feel this? I shouldn't feel this anymore. Spent $10,000 in therapy just last year. It should be gone, you know.
You should be angry about that.
Yes. I'm even angrier now that I think about that, you know. That's not generative. That's not onward leading. Where we can capture all that energy into what we can do, which is changing our relationship to it. And that begins with knowing what we're feeling. Because it's not uncommon to be steaming and not even know it. And it's building, and my favorite example is go off to the computer and we type out the email and we press send. And then 2 hours later we go, whoops. I guess I said that with some hostility, didn't I? I may not get what I want.
Thomas Jefferson said, if you're angry, take 10 deep breaths. And he said, if you're really angry, take 100. He said.
Yeah.
When did you find that out?
I knew it a long time ago. And, I've been trying to do it, as you know. He had a little mindfulness going there. When the Dalai Lama actually went to Monticello, and then afterwards to the Jefferson Memorial in D.C., he got all excited. He said, I think I'm his reincarnation.
Ooh.
And the press went wild over that. No, he did. He said that. I say, what is this about? I'm reincarnated. I think I'm his reincarnation. Because he loves to tinker with things, so all the weird inventions that Jefferson had in his house, and then seeing all the expressions of enlightenment and education that Jefferson writes in the memorial. He said, I think I'm his incarnation. I must be his reincarnation.
Ooh.
He did.
This has been great, you guys.
Okay, what's the story? Are we...
I think we're ending.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good job.
Thank you.